That dog didn't stop you from dying up top just so you could leave him holding the whole mountain alone again." The words landed harder than the shots. Caleb stared one beat longer, then jammed both hands under the bent strut and used the anger like fuel. Metal screamed. Garrett bit down on his own sleeve to stop from yelling. Caleb heaved again, shoulder and back straining until something finally gave with a sharp crack. "Now!" he barked. Garrett yanked his leg free and almost blacked out from the pain, but the cord took enough weight to keep him from dropping. Caleb swung him inward against the ladder's spine, got one arm around his waist, and started climbing.
Almost there, hold on!
Every rung felt wrong with another man half-conscious against him.
You'll regret this!
Every movement one slip away from the river below. Above, the bridge shook again. Another shot from the far bank splintered the outer beam. Then Rook's growl rolled through the span in a savage burst that told Caleb the near-side attacker was still in the fight and losing. Halfway up, Garrett coughed against Caleb's shoulder and forced out 3 words that changed the air around them. "Pouch! Take it." Caleb's eyes cut to the waterproof pouch strapped beneath Garrett's torn rain shell.
Move, K9, across the first bridge, now!
Garrett swallowed blood and river spray together.
Second team,
"Because if I go over,
we're going in.
That's what they came for."
I knew you'd find me.
Not just bait.
Wait, what is this?
Cargo.
Oh,
Caleb shifted his grip, hooked 2 fingers under the strap buckle, and tore the pouch free one-handed while clinging to the ladder with the other. The pouch nearly slipped from his wet hand before he jammed it inside his jacket. Above, Rook barked again, but the bark changed halfway through into a deep warning snarl directed not toward the near-side attacker anymore, but farther back up the trail. Caleb understood instantly. More movement. More men. He climbed harder. When his hand finally hooked the top rung and his head came level with the stone lip, the whole scene broke open at once. The near-side attacker was down on one knee in the mud beside the bridge anchor, one arm wrapped defensively around his throat, while Rook circled just out of reach, black ant and body tense and ready to launch again. The dog was not finishing him because the man had a knife in one hand and was using the bridge cable as cover. Beyond him, farther up the trail, 2 more figures were moving through the pines with rifles low and fast, using the trees in disciplined short bursts. Professionals. Not drifters. Caleb's blood went ice-cold. He hauled Garrett over the rim anyway, dragging him onto the wet ground behind the anchor stone just as a round from the far bank smacked into the rock face and sprayed both men with fragments. Garrett crumpled hard, half on his side, one hand instantly reaching for Caleb's jacket where the pouch now sat hidden. "Don't let them burn it," he said, voice shredded. Caleb barely had time to process the line before the kneeling attacker by the anchor lunged with the knife. Rook hit him mid-motion, not at the chest, not at the face, but square into the forearm, driving the blade wide. Caleb crossed the distance in 2 strides and kicked the man's wrist so hard the knife flew into the gorge. The attacker twisted under the impact and reached for a sidearm at his back. Caleb brought the pistol down under the man's jaw. "Who sent you?" The man smiled through river spray and blood, and that smile was worse than the gunfire because it carried certainty instead of panic. "Same man who left him alive for you to find," he said. Rook's growl deepened until it vibrated through the cable. The words hit Caleb like a strike to the ribs. Left him alive. Not failed to finish. Not lost track. Left alive. Deliberate. Controlled. Garrett, barely conscious behind the anchor, let out one broken sound that might have been warning, but Caleb caught it too late. The attacker's free hand came up from the mud not empty, but holding a compact transmitter no bigger than a pack of cigarettes. His thumb pressed down. Somewhere under the bridge deck, directly beneath the 3rd plank Rook had refused to cross, a hidden charge clicked from waiting into armed, and the entire span gave one long groaning shudder over the river just as the 2 riflemen in the pines broke into a full sprint toward them. Caleb moved before the bridge finished groaning. He drove the pistol under the attacker's jaw harder, but the man only smiled through river spray and blood, thumb still buried on the transmitter, as the hidden charge beneath the third plank armed with a second metallic click that sounded far too small for the amount of death it was about to release. Rook saw it first. Of course he did. The black-antenned shepherd slammed into the man's wrist with all his weight, teeth closing above the knuckles, and the transmitter flew sideways into the mud just as the first rifleman on the far bank dropped to one knee and sighted down through the cables. "Down!" Caleb roared, shoving Garrett flat behind the anchor stone. The bridge blew a half-second later. Not all of it. Worse. A violent directional blast punched upward from beneath the third plank, shredding the near section of boards and blowing a jagged hole through the center span. Timber, rust flakes, and cable splinters burst across the gorge. The whole bridge snapped sideways with a scream of steel, one side rope shearing free, and the kneeling attacker lost his footing. Rook released at the exact right moment and sprang clear while the man pinwheeled backward into the torn railing. He caught the outer cable with one arm and hung there, howling over the river. Caleb had no time to finish him. The rifle cracked from across the gorge and a round smashed into the anchor block inches from Garrett's head, spraying stone dust into both men's faces. Rook barked once toward the pines, once toward the hanging attacker, then spun back to Caleb with that same furious urgency that always meant choose now. Caleb chose movement. He grabbed Garrett by the vest and dragged him behind the old cable housing beside the cliff wall, while the damaged bridge whipped in the wind like something dying. The second rifleman broke from the tree line on the far side and sprinted toward the torn span, stopping short when he saw the hole blown through the decking. Good. Let the damage slow them. But the shooter across the gorge never stopped firing. One round punched through the hanging planks. Another hit the near rail. A third sparked off the old maintenance ring above Caleb's shoulder. Precision. Calm. Whoever was on that far bank was not rattled by explosives or chaos. Caleb hated that kind of man because he had once worked beside too many of them. "Can you move?" he snapped at Garrett. Garrett's face had gone nearly white under the grime, but he still held on to consciousness with the same stubbornness that had apparently kept him alive under a bridge. "Can I suffer with style?" "Absolutely." Caleb nearly cursed at him, but Rook suddenly wheeled toward the hanging attacker still clinging to the cable. The man had stopped screaming. He was reaching instead, one hand slipping toward a secondary sidearm at his ankle. Rook growled once, low and murderous. Caleb saw it too. He fired twice. The first round missed in the sway and took splinters off the railing. The second hit the man high in the shoulder. The attacker's grip broke. He vanished into the gorge without another word, swallowed instantly by mist and river noise. Rehook. One danger gone. Not enough. "Move!" Caleb barked again, hauling Garrett up by the arm. Garrett nearly collapsed, bad leg folding under him, and only stayed upright because Caleb locked a shoulder under him and dragged. Rook ran ahead instead of beside them, not toward the trail back, but along the cliff wall to the right where an old maintenance cut disappeared behind scrub and broken stone. Caleb understood immediately. Not the open trail. Not under the rifle. Another route. He followed the dog at once. The path was barely a path at all, just a narrow service ledge carved into the canyon wall decades earlier, when somebody still pretended this bridge mattered enough to repair. Wet moss made the stone slick. Loose gravel hissed into the gorge under every step. Caleb kept Garrett pinned to the cliffside and moved in ugly bursts, waiting each time Rook stopped and looked back, using the dog's pauses like commands. Gunfire kept chasing them. The farbank shooter had shifted angle now, round slapping sparks off the cliff face instead of trying to thread the broken bridge. Good. Bad angle meant he had to guess. But guessing men got lucky all the time. Wind tore up through the canyon. The severed bridge banged behind them in wild broken rhythm. Then came a new sound, boots on the near trail above. The two riflemen weren't stranded after all. They were doubling back toward the service ledge entrance on Caleb's side of the gorge. Layered trap. Layered pursuit. Caleb's ribs tightened. Rook barked twice and vanished around the bend ahead. Caleb pushed harder, dragging Garrett into a shallow recess in the rock just as a bullet screamed across the ledge and ricocheted into the gorge. Too close. Garrett hit the cliff wall with a grunt and nearly went down. Caleb pinned him there and listened. River below. Wind above. Footsteps somewhere behind, closer now. And in front of them, beyond the bend where Rook had gone, a faint metallic clank. Not gunfire. Not bridge noise. Something mechanical in the rock. Caleb edged the pistol around the corner first, then his eyes. The ledge widened into a small blasted-out platform built against the canyon wall. A rusted maintenance winch sat bolted to the stone. Beside it was a steel service cage hanging on old guide rails that dropped toward a shadowed shelf farther down the gorge. An elevator, or what had once been one. Rook stood beside the cage door, barking furiously at the padlock chain around it. Of course. A way down. A way off the rifle line. Caleb almost laughed from pure disbelief at the dog's refusal to let death stay simple. He shoved Garrett onto the platform. "Can that thing hold?" Garrett stared at the cage like he was looking at a coffin someone had hung in the air and dared him to trust. "If the cable hasn't rotted through." "Helpful." Caleb holstered the pistol long enough to slam the butt against the rusted lock. Once. Twice. The third strike cracked the housing, but before he could tear the chain free, a voice cut through the canyon from behind them. Calm. Familiar in the worst possible way. "You always did let the dog choose your exits." Caleb froze. Garrett's face changed instantly, not with confusion, but with dread so old it looked permanent. Rook spun, hackles high, and gave a broken, furious bark toward the bend in the ledge. Slow footsteps followed. One man, not rushing, not worried, coming toward them with the kind of patience only someone holding all the angles could afford. Caleb ripped the chain free, shoved Garrett into the hanging cage, and turned with the pistol up just as the speaker stepped into view from the drifting mist. Older than Caleb. Beard gray at the edges. One side of the face marked by an old burned scar that pulled the mouth into a permanent half-hook. Dark rain jacket. Carbine low, not raised, like he didn't need it yet. Rook's growl changed the instant he saw the man. Not stranger danger. Not pure attack. Recognition. Garrett made a sound that was almost a whisper and almost a curse. "No," he breathed. Caleb felt the world narrow. "You know him." Garrett's good eye stayed locked on the approaching figure. "I buried him." The man smiled faintly at that, as if the line amused him. Then he looked past Caleb straight at the dog and said, with devastating calm, "Took you long enough to bring him back to me." Rook exploded against Caleb's leg so hard the pistol wavered, not because he wanted to run to the man, but because every muscle in him had gone rigid with the kind of grief fury only old betrayal could create. Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. "Say your name." The man stopped 3 paces beyond the bend, river mist moving around him like smoke. His eyes flicked once to Garrett in the cage, once to the waterproof pouch hidden under Caleb's jacket, then back to the shepherd. "He knows my voice," the man said quietly. "That matters more than my name." Garrett looked like he might actually pass out now, not from blood loss, but from memory crashing into the present too hard to stand under. Caleb kept the pistol centered on the man's chest. "Last chance." The man's smile thinned. "Fine. I'm the reason your friend was still breathing when the bridge trap armed." He let that land, then tilted his head toward Rook. "And I'm the reason your dog has been carrying the wrong grief for 8 years." The canyon seemed to drop out from under Caleb at those words. Garrett shut his eyes in pain. Rook let out one torn, chest-deep sound Caleb had not heard since hospital nights after the coast mission. Emotional shock hit clean and brutal, because in that instant Caleb knew two things at once without yet understanding either of them fully. This man was tied directly to the night Garrett was supposed to have died, and whatever truth he held was twisted so deep into Rook's memory that even the dog was breaking under it. Then the man lifted his free hand slightly, palm outward, as if calming a room instead of cornering wounded men on a canyon ledge, and said the one sentence that turned the whole mountain colder. "If you shoot me now, you'll never know why the shepherd refused the first bridge that night too." Caleb's finger stayed tight on the trigger, but it did not move. Not because he trusted the older man standing in the mist with a carbine low and a half-burned face cut hard by canyon light, and not because he believed one word of what had just been said. He stopped because Rook had stopped. The black-antened shepherd was still growling, still rigid, still carrying rage in every locked muscle, but he was not launching. He was staring. Not at the rifle. Not at the man's hands. At the man's scent, his stance, his voice, as if something buried years ago had just walked back into the world wearing a human body. Garrett saw it too, and whatever blood he still had left in his face seemed to drain out with one look. "Mercer," he whispered, and the name came out like a wound reopening. The older man's mouth pulled slightly at one side, not quite a smile, not quite regret. "Still breathing, Garrett. That disappoints more people than you know." Wind tore through the gorge. Behind them the broken bridge banged and screamed against its surviving cables, spraying mist into the canyon like shredded rain. Caleb kept the pistol centered. "You know him." Garrett gave a laugh so brittle it broke into a cough. "Demolitions. Secondary team. Officially dead." Mercer tipped his head a fraction. "Conveniently dead." Rook gave one hard bark at that, then looked back at Caleb, and the expression in the dog's eyes hit him harder than the rifle fire had. Not simple warning. Not only danger. Recognition wrapped around old pain. Mercer saw Caleb understand part of it, and pressed the knife deeper. "He didn't just refuse this bridge because of the wire," he said quietly. "He refused because he knew my work before he saw it." Caleb felt the canyon narrow around those words. "You're saying the dog recognized you?" "No," Mercer said. "I'm saying he recognized the pattern. The oil. The solvent. The way the trigger line sits onto the third board because it leaves the cleaner break." Garrett shut his eyes once, like he had heard that voice explaining bad things in calm tones too many times before. Mercer took one step closer. Rook's growl rose instantly. Mercer stopped without fear. "First bridge, same layout," he said. "Same near-side crush tube. Same false weakness built into the center span. The shepherd planted and refused, and you overrode him because command said the crossing was clear." Caleb's mouth went dry. Memory hit not cleanly, not all at once, but in violent fragments. Rain on steel, night vision green, Rook pulling backward against the harness, somebody in his headset saying move, 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 and one of his men already halfway over the bridge before the dog's refusal could become a decision. "That's not what happened," Caleb said, but the words came out then, and he hated that Mercer heard it. The older man's eyes did not leave his. "It's exactly what happened. The only difference between then and now is that this time the dog won." Rehook. New truth. Deeper wound. Garrett tried to push himself higher against the service cage and failed, bad legs shaking violently. "Don't listen to him," he rasped. "He only ever tells the truth when it poisons something." Mercer glanced at him without warmth. "And yet I'm still the only one saying it out loud." Footsteps sounded behind the bend in the ledge. Fast now. More than one. The two riflemen had found the service platform entrance. Caleb heard stones scatter under their boots and knew the window had shrunk to seconds. Mercer heard it too, but did not even look back. That was worse than if he had. "Give me the pouch," he said, voice still maddeningly calm. "You don't know what you're carrying." Caleb shifted the pistol higher. "Then explain it." Mercer's gaze flicked to Caleb's jacket, where the waterproof pouch sat hidden beneath the fabric. "It isn't the ledger. It isn't the names. It's the key to read what was copied before the fire." Garrett grabbed Caleb's sleeve hard enough to hurt. "He gets that pouch. You never hear the rest." Mercer's expression barely changed, but Rook's entire body did. The shepherd pivoted in one violent movement and barked not at Mercer, not at the trail behind them, but at the rusted winch housing bolted beside the hanging cage. Caleb followed the line instantly. There, half concealed under a flap of old greasecloth, was a second wire looped around the brake catch. Sabotage. The service cage would not simply lower if he dropped Garrett inside and cut the lock. It would free fall. Mercer saw Caleb see it and gave the smallest nod, as if acknowledging a move finally understood. "You don't survive this long by trusting the obvious mechanism," he said. The first rifle shot from the bin slammed into the platform wall, showering all four men with stone dust and rust flakes. Rook exploded into barking. Caleb moved. He holstered the pistol long enough to rip the pry bar from his bag, hook it under the winch cover, and tear the rusted panel free. Inside, the brake gear sat with a fresh wedge pin jammed between the teeth. One wrong pull on the release lever, and the cage would drop clean off its guide. Garrett made a raw sound behind him. Mercer's boots shifted half a step, not advancing, not retreating, just waiting. That waiting chilled Caleb more than aggression would have. The riflemen were now close enough that he could hear breath between the canyon gusts. Rook turned toward them and gave a different bark this time, short, hammering, urgent. Not enough time. Caleb jammed the pry bar into the brake teeth and heaved. Nothing. The second shot punched through the cage mesh inches from Garrett's head. He flinched, almost toppled, and only stayed in the car because Caleb caught the collar of his coat and shoved him deeper inside. "Manual crank," Garrett shouted, voice cracking. "Left side, old emergency handle." Caleb dropped low, found the full flat iron crank half hidden under moss and cable rust, kicked it free, and slammed it onto the spindle. The first turn barely moved. The second screamed. The third unlocked the whole housing with a shriek loud enough to echo off the gorge walls. Above the sound came one of the riflemen yelling, "There!" Rook launched toward the bend in the ledge before Caleb could stop him. The dog hit the first man at knee height, just as the second tried to clear his rifle past the narrow rock wall. All three bodies jammed the passage in an ugly knot of fur, boots, and flailing metal. Caleb saw one muzzle flash wild into the canyon, saw Rook disappear under a shoulder, saw the second man stumbling backward into the outer edge rope. He turned the crank harder. The cage jolted downward 6 inches, then a foot. Garrett bit down on his forearm to smother the scream as the bad leg shifted. Mercer still had not fired. He stood where he was, mist moving around him, watching the entire thing like he had seen versions of it before. "Why are you letting us go?" Caleb snapped. Mercer's eyes sharpened, and for the first time something like real emotion crossed the ruined calm in them. "Because what's in that pouch is older than any of us, and if you die without hearing it, then the wrong men keep writing the ending." Caleb turned the crank again. The cage dropped another foot. Rook snarled. A rifle clattered across stone. One of the pursuing men screamed as the dog tore through him. The second fired point blank, and the round struck the canyon wall, blowing chips across Rook's flank, but not stopping him. Caleb's heart kicked once so hard he nearly lost the handle. "Rook!" The shepherd disengaged on the exact beat Caleb shouted, lunged backward off the trapped rifleman, and cleared the cage threshold in one impossible fluid motion, landing beside Garrett just as Caleb spun the crank again and sent the cage dropping below the platform line. Bullets slapped metal mesh. Mercer vanished above the lip, either by choice or because he had stepped away from the view. The last thing Caleb saw before the canyon wall swallowed the platform was one of the riflemen crawling toward the edge with blood all down his sleeve and Mercer's boots turning, not to chase, but to leave. That was wrong. Deeply wrong. Men who wanted something that badly did not walk away unless they already believed the next step would still lead you where they wanted. The cage rattled down the guide rails in violent jerks, metal screaming, river mist drenching all three of them. Caleb kept one hand on the crank brake, the other on Rook's harness, as the dog fought to stand despite the side wound and the swelling front leg. Garrett sagged against the cage wall, shaking from shock and pain, but his eyes never left Caleb's jacket. "Open it now," he whispered. Caleb did. Not because he trusted Garrett more than Mercer, but because the whole canyon felt like it had turned into a machine designed around that pouch, and he needed to know why. Inside were three things, all sealed in wax plastic. First, an old photograph. Second, a microcassette no longer than Caleb's thumb. Third, a folded note, softened by water but still intact. The photo hit him first. For men standing beside a military footbridge under rain-dark canvas skies years earlier, before the coast, before retirement, before all the funerals and lies. Caleb knew every face instantly. Himself, younger and harder. Garrett, leaner, unscarred. A third man whose smile still hurt to look at because it belonged to the friend Caleb had buried in memory long before the official report did. And on the far end, one hand resting on a bridge cable, was Mercer, unburned, unbroken, and wearing the exact same calm expression he wore now. But it was the dog in the foreground that made Caleb's fingers go numb. A younger Rook stood planted at the mouth of that bridge, refusing to move, body locked exactly the way he had locked tonight. The same refusal. The same warning. The same bridge posture years apart. Garrett saw Caleb freeze on the image, and gave one small broken nod. He remembered, he whispered. Caleb tore open the note next. The handwriting inside was the dead man's. No doubt. No question. Caleb had seen it on mission maps, on ammo counts, on one birthday card mailed from a transit base that still sat in a drawer at home because grief made archivists of the weakest parts of men. The words on the page were short enough to read in one breath and brutal enough to stop that breath halfway. If Garrett is the one who gets this to you, Mercer wasn't the only man who lied about what happened under the first bridge. The cage jolted hard on the rails. Rook let out a low wounded sound and pressed against Caleb's leg as if he felt the sentence land through his skin. Caleb looked from the note to Garrett, whose face had gone white all over again, not from blood loss this time, but from the fact that he knew exactly what Caleb had just read. Then the cage hit the lower shelf with a violent metallic crash, the door shuddered loose on its latch, and somewhere in the tunnel ahead, deep in the dark below the canyon, a voice came out of the black before either man could speak. "He finally read it, didn't he?" Caleb brought the pistol up so fast the cage door clanged against its rails. But the voice in the dark below the canyon shelf did not answer with panic. It answered with a lantern. A weak yellow flame bloomed somewhere beyond the dripping black of the service tunnel, and an old man stepped into the light with one hand raised and the other wrapped around the handle of a storm lantern that shook only because the wind found its way into the gorge. He was tall once, maybe, but the mountain had bent him forward over the years. Long gray coat. Narrow face. Deep-set eyes that looked less surprised to see armed men, and a bleeding shepherd drop out of the bridge cage than a sane man should have been. "Easy," he said, voice roughened by cold and smoke and long solitude. "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have sent the letter." Caleb did not lower the pistol. Garrett, half folded inside the cage with his bad leg shaking, let out one raw breath that sounded almost like relief. "Elias!" The old man looked at him, and something hard passed through his face. "You took your time dying." Rook growled low, still staring past the lantern instead of at it, nose angled toward the shadowed tunnel walls, as if danger had not ended just because a familiar voice had emerged from the dark. Good. The dog was right far more often than men with explanations. Elias Reed, the preacher from the letter, or what was left of him, stepped back and lifted the lantern higher. Behind him, the tunnel widened into an old maintenance chamber cut into the stone itself, with rusted pulleys on one wall, bridge diagrams curled under glass, a dead generator in the corner, and an iron table cluttered with cables, oil rags, and one small cassette playback unit already waiting, as if he had known exactly what Caleb would carry down here. Rehook. Not rescue. Preparation. Caleb shoved Garrett out of the cage and into the chamber while Rook limped in last, turning once to bark up the shaft where the hanging rails vanished into mist. Elias heard it and nodded grimly. "Mercer won't give you long." That name sharpened the room instantly. Caleb kicked the cage release lever, sent the empty car rattling back upward as a decoy, and turned on Elias hard. "Start talking." Elias set the lantern on the table beside the cassette unit and looked first at the pouch under Caleb's jacket, then at Rook's bandaged side, then at Garrett's face. "Not with all of it," he said. "Just the part you can survive hearing first." Caleb wanted to grab him by the coat and smash the answer out of him, but Rook suddenly stepped in front of the chamber doorway and froze, ears high, one paw lifted, eyes fixed on the threshold timber. Caleb followed the line of the dog's stare, and saw it 2 beats later, a hair-thin line strung knee-high across the stone just inside the entrance, nearly invisible except where one droplet of mist clung to it. Tripwire. Fresh. Elias went still. "I didn't set that." "Good. Bad. Very bad." Mercer's people had been here already, or expected they would come here. Caleb cut the line with the tip of his knife, then used the lantern to track it back to a primer canister hidden under an old cable box. Noise trap, maybe flash, maybe worse in a tunnel this tight. Rook pressed once against Caleb's leg after the cut, and then swung toward the cassette unit on the table, not leaving the room now, not pulling for the tunnel, but standing beside the machine with a tension that made Caleb's ribs tighten. Elias saw it too. "That's why he came," the old man said softly. "Not for Garrett. Not for Mercer. For the truth they wrapped around the dog and called evidence." Caleb tore open the pouch. Inside were the photograph, the note, and the microcassette. His fingers felt thick and clumsy now, not because of fear, but because some part of him already knew that once the tape played there would be no going back to the version of the past he had survived on. Garrett dragged himself onto a stool by the wall, face gray, breath ragged. "Play it," he said. Before they reached the lower door, Caleb shoved the tape into the machine. The little motor caught with a dry click. Static hiss, then rain. Not river rain. Hard metallic rain on steel. Bridge rain. Caleb's pulse stumbled. The first clear voice through the speaker was Garrett's, younger and sharper, and alive with adrenaline. "Charges aren't clean. I'm telling you they're not clean." Another voice cut over him, calm and clipped through headset distortion. Command? "Cross now. Window is closing." Then came barking. Not from the present. From the tape. Younger Rook, frantic, refusing, claws scraping metal. Caleb felt his throat close. On the tape another voice came next, and the room seemed to lose all air because it was his own. Years younger, breathless, angry, under pressure, but unmistakably his. "Move him across!" The words hit with the force of a physical blow. Rook, standing in the room beside the table, flinched as if the sound itself had struck him. Caleb stared at the cassette machine, every muscle locked. On the tape, Garrett shouted again, "He's refusing for a reason." Then his own younger voice came back harder, cutting through the weather, through the barking, through every excuse Caleb had wrapped around that memory for 8 years. "I said take the dog and cross." The blast that followed on the tape made Elias grab the lantern to stop it from toppling. Metal screamed through the tiny speaker. Men shouted. Somebody was thrown. Water. Fire. Then the tape warbled with interference and a new voice arrived, low, wounded, fading, the voice from the note, the voice Caleb had buried under official reports and sleepless nights and every lie he told himself about impossible conditions. "If he hears this," the voice said, "tell him Mercer wasn't the only one who buried the truth." Caleb could not breathe. It was not just command. Not just Mercer. Not just hidden charges. Rook had refused that first bridge, and Caleb, under orders and fear and the blind arrogance of needing the timeline to hold, had overridden him. He had forced the crossing. He had spent years hating faceless command while carving himself into the victim of a dirty operation. But here in the mountain chamber the tape stripped it down to the ugliest bone. When the shepherd had said no, Caleb had chosen men over the dog. Garrett watched him with hollow, exhausted eyes. "I lied in my statement too," he said quietly. "Said the detonation came without warning. Said none of us could have known. I told myself I was protecting the living from a court-martial while the dead were still warm." Elias lowered his head, the lantern painting deep shadows under his brow. "And Mercer protected himself by making sure every surviving record scattered in different directions. One piece in the bridge cache. One piece with me. One piece where no one would think to look until the shepherd dragged you to it." Caleb heard the words, but they struggled to land through the roaring in his ears. Rook moved then, slowly, and placed one paw against Caleb's boot, not accusation, not comfort, just the same impossible steadying pressure he had used at the well, at the grave, at every edge where Caleb's mind started to go under. "Stay here. Stay now." Caleb dropped to one knee without choosing to. "I made him cross," he whispered, not to Elias or Garrett, but to the dog. Rook's eyes stayed on him, unreadable and devastating in their steadiness. Garrett swallowed against pain. "You were following command and trying to save the rest of us." Caleb shook his head once sharply. "No. I heard him. I heard you. And I still made the call." Emotional shock came clean then, harder than bullets, because Mercer's line on the ledge was true in the ugliest way possible. Mercer wasn't the only liar. Caleb had lied to himself longer and deeper than any of them. A blast slammed the lower tunnel door before anyone could speak again. The iron frame jumped in its hinges. Rook spun with a violent bark. Elias killed the lantern and the chamber dropped into darkness lit only by the cassette machine's tiny red eye and the weak spill from the service shaft. A second impact followed, then the scream of metal under prying force. Mercer's men had found the lower access. Garrett pushed off the stool, nearly fell, caught himself on the table. "There's a flood sluice behind the generator," he said through clenched teeth. "Leads to the old abutment chamber. One way out." Elias was already yanking a tarp off the generator housing, revealing a narrow iron hatch behind it cut into the stone floor. Caleb grabbed the photo, the note, and the machine together, but Garrett's hand shot out and stopped him. "Not the machine," he said. "Tape's enough. The player stays." Caleb looked at him. Garrett's face had gone beyond pain now into decision. Outside, the lower door splintered under a third hit. "If they see the player move," Garrett said, "they know we got the tape." Rehook. Choice. Loss coming. Caleb understood at once and hated it. Elias understood too, because his old shoulders sagged under the knowledge of what needed to happen next. "I can hold the door," the preacher said. "You can't even hold that lantern steady." Garrett shot back, then looked at Caleb. "Take the dog. Take the tape. Get to the abutment chamber." Caleb stared at him. "No." Garrett almost smiled at that, and the sad certainty in it hit worse than if he had begged. "You already made one wrong bridge choice for the dog," he said. "Don't make another for me." The lower door burst inward at the top hinge. Rifle muzzle first, then light. Rook launched before thought could catch up, smashing into the opening gap so hard the first man went backward into the tunnel wall. Gunfire detonated inside the chamber. Elias shouted. Caleb dropped behind the table and fired once toward the doorway, catching only sparks and stone. Garrett shoved the cassette tape into Caleb's hand, then snatched the playback unit off the table and hurled it into the wall behind him. Plastic exploded. Good. Bad. The evidence survived, but the device didn't. Men surged the threshold. Rook tore one down by the arm, but another boot crashed into the dog's flank and sent him skidding across the stone. Caleb moved toward him instantly, and that instant cost everything. Garrett seized the fallen lantern, smashed it against the oil rags by the doorway, and fire raced up the cable drapes in one hot rushing sheet. "Go!" he roared. Elias grabbed Caleb by the jacket and physically dragged him toward the floor hatch while the chamber filled with smoke, shouting, muzzle flashes, and the smell of burning grease. Caleb twisted once, reaching for Garrett, and saw him framed in firelight and gun smoke with one hand on the broken door lever and the other shoving a rifleman back into the flames. Rook staggered to his feet and lunged toward Garrett too, but Caleb caught the harness with both hands just before the dog could throw himself into the burning choke point. The last thing Caleb heard before Elias slammed the sluice hatch shut over them was Garrett's voice, shredded but steady through the roar. "If Mercer gets me alive, he gets the lockbox key." Then the hatch sealed, darkness swallowed them, and from the other side of the iron plate came one final gunshot followed by a silence, so complete Caleb knew, before anybody said it, that they had not escaped with all three men. The flood sluice was too narrow to stand straight in, too cold to think clearly in, and too dark for grief to stay in one shape. Caleb stumbled after Elias through knee-deep runoff and black stone, while Rook fought him every third step, twisting back toward the sealed hatch as if the dog could still hear Garrett's heartbeat through iron, smoke, and rock. Maybe he could. That was the worst part of being with a dog like Rook. Caleb had spent years pretending memory lived mostly in men, in reports, in voices, in the dead weight of words, like command and fallback and collateral. But Rook remembered with his whole body. The dog remembered through stance, through scent, through sounds carried in timber and water. And now, even bleeding from the flank and limping on a swelling front leg, he kept dragging backward toward the chamber they had just escaped, refusing the lie that one gunshot and one slammed hatch could settle anything. "He knows," Elias said over his shoulder, lantern wobbling in his hand as the sluice narrowed. "Dogs always know before we're brave enough to name it." Caleb didn't answer. If he opened his mouth right then, the wrong thing would come out. Anger. Guilt. Garrett's name. His own. The water deepened around their boots, and then dropped away as the tunnel widened into a lower abutment chamber carved into the canyon's spine itself. The place smelled of mineral damp, old grease, and the faint stale trace of burned fuse cord. Rook moved ahead at once, not toward the shelves or the old winch drums or the cracked inspection desk at the far wall, but toward a section of masonry beneath the bridge anchor bolts where three rectangular maintenance covers sat side by side in the stone. He froze in front of the middle one and barked once, sharp and furious, then lowered his muzzle to the seam and whined through clenched teeth. Caleb felt the sound cut straight into his ribs. "That's where he wants us." Elias set the lantern down and bent beside the dog, fingertips brushing the rust-dark plate without quite touching it. "Because this one hears the river the same way the first bridge did," he said softly. "That's why Garrett hid the real evidence here. Not because it was clever. Because the dog would never stop hearing it." Caleb's hands were already on the steel cover before the sentence finished. The thing was locked with an old maintenance wheel, heavy with rust, but the rust had been disturbed recently. Fresh scratches around the hub. Someone had tried this door. Someone had failed or been interrupted. Rehook. Not safe. Not abandoned. "Can Mercer open it?" Caleb asked. Elias shook his head once. "Not without the sequence." Caleb turned on him hard. "Then start talking like a man who mailed a dying soldier into a canyon for a reason." Elias took the blow without flinching. "Garrett was the sequence," he said. "That's what he meant by the key. Not metal. Memory. 3 boxes. Same locks. Only one real. Only Garrett knew which cover carried the live hinge, and which 2 would collapse the alcove if someone forced them blind." Caleb stared at the 3 covers again and felt cold spread through him. Garrett was gone above them, or dead, or captured, or bleeding out in the chamber they'd barely escaped, and now the man they needed to tell them which door held truth was the very man Caleb had just left behind in fire and gun smoke. Rook solved that problem too. Of course he did. The shepherd ignored the left and right covers entirely, put one paw against the middle plate, and then did something Caleb had not seen since the coast mission. He looked straight at Caleb, held the stare, and then scratched once. Not random. Not frantic. A command. This one. Caleb swallowed hard. "You trust him?" Elias asked. Caleb didn't even look up. "More than any man who ever gave me orders." He spun the wheel. Once. Twice. It held. Third turn and something inside the stone let go with a deep hydraulic clunk that seemed to wake the whole chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling seams. Water shivered in the drain trench. The middle cover opened inward 3 inches by itself, heavy as a vault, and cold air breathed out carrying old paper, gun oil, and the kind of sealed human history that should have stayed buried forever. Caleb pulled it wide. Inside was not one lockbox, but a narrow shelf vault lined with waterproof tins, real canisters, maintenance ledgers, and a compact hard case wrapped in canvas scorched black at one corner. Rook shoved his nose past Caleb's arm and went straight to the burned case, pressing against it with a low broken sound that made Elias close his eyes for one brief second. "That one," the old man murmured. "That's the one he died trying to save." Caleb lifted the case out. It was heavier than it looked, older than the other pieces. On the lid, beneath soot and age, was stenciled a bridge inspection code from the year of the first mission. His pulse kicked once, hard enough to blur the lantern light. "Open it," Elias said. Caleb set it on the desk and cracked both latches. Inside lay a body cam unit sealed in wax, a folded engineer's sketch of the first bridge, 2 mission transcripts, and a plastic sleeve holding 4 photographs. He saw the third photo first because it was the one Rook immediately laid his muzzle against. Night rain. Steel bridge. Younger Rook planted at the mouth of it, every muscle refusing. Caleb farther back, shouting. Garrett near the rail. Mercer lower on the support side, halfway down an access chain. And beneath the bridge itself, barely visible through rain and metal lattice, a man hanging from the underframe, alive and reaching upward. Caleb's breath vanished. Not dead on the far side. Not lost in the blast zone after the crossing. Under the bridge. Alive before the detonation. His knees nearly went out. "No," he whispered, but the word carried less denial than horror. Elias slid the engineer's sketch toward the lantern. The page was marked with red grease pencil. Original charges here. Secondary line here. Remote kill switch routed through command relay. Caleb's eyes locked on the secondary line notation, and the room began to tilt. The first bridge had not only been wired to go. It had been wired twice. Primary demolition to cut access. Secondary remote charge under the underframe to erase whoever survived the first blast or tried to reach them. The same pattern as tonight. The same murderous logic under a different span. Mercer hadn't been speaking in metaphor on the ledge. He had been describing a design. "Who signed off on this?" Caleb asked, voice gone low and dangerous in a way that used to terrify younger men overseas. Elias didn't answer. He handed him one of the transcripts instead. Caleb unfolded it, and felt the world narrow to black print. It was the calm log from that night, not the sanitized version from the inquiry, but the raw relay. He saw Garrett warning that the charges were wrong. He saw his own voice ordering the dog forward. He saw Mercer requesting abort when the secondary line appeared under the rail. He saw command override all three. And at the bottom, initialed on the remote authorization that triggered the second blast, was a name Caleb trusted once more than his own pulse. Commander Harlan Pike. His team commander. His mentor. The man who had stood at the memorial 3 weeks later with one hand on Caleb's shoulder and told him the dog had only panicked because war made animals feral around fire. Caleb stared until the letters swam. "Pike," he said, and even his own voice sounded foreign to him now. Elias nodded once. "He built the operation around bridges and river routes because no one questions maintenance failures in bad weather. Mercer placed the first charges under orders. Garrett found the second line too late. Your friend copied the payment records out of the lower room when he realized the mission was a cleanup, not a rescue. Then he tried to get beneath the bridge with the evidence when the first detonation cut him off." Caleb reached for the wax-sealed body cam with fingers that no longer felt like his. Rook pressed closer, breathing shallow, eyes fixed. Caleb broke the seal, powered the unit from the chamber's old converter jack, and the tiny screen flickered to life in grainy Rain Street green. The footage was from under the first bridge. Somebody, his dead friend, had clipped the cam to a strap while hanging from the lower frame. The image shook with every breath. Rain hammered steel overhead. Somewhere above, younger Rook barked himself raw. Then came voices. Garrett shouting that Mercer was already climbing down. Mercer shouting for Caleb to hold the dog because the second line was still hot. Caleb's own younger voice cutting through it all, confused, pressured, trying to make the wrong battlefield obey. Then Commander Pike came onto the line, calm as winter, and gave the order that had lived in Caleb's head for 8 years as necessity. "Cross now! Leave the underframe! He's gone!" But on the screen, beneath that lie, the camera wearer was still moving, still breathing, still dragging one hand toward the support chain while muttering through blood. "I've got the copies. Tell the dog, he was right." Caleb shut his eyes, but the audio kept running. Pike ordering the remote trigger. Mercer screaming abort. Garrett swearing he had visual on a live man. The first blast ripping across the span. Then the second, deeper, uglier, deliberate. The screen went white and died. Silence swallowed the chamber except for the river vibrating through stone and Rook's ragged breathing beside the desk. Major reveal did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like weight. Heavy enough to buckle bone. Caleb had spent 8 years hating the wrong shape of betrayal. Mercer had been guilty, yes, of rigging, of obeying, of burying, of surviving in rotten ways. But Mercer had not killed the underframe survivor. Pike had. Pike had overridden the dog, the men, and the truth itself, then handed Caleb a lie big enough to live inside. Caleb looked down at Rook, at the dog who had refused both bridges, both times, and felt shame move through him like a blade. "You tried to tell me," he whispered. Rook lifted one paw and rested it against Caleb's boot, the same calm anchoring pressure as before, and somehow that mercy hurt worse than accusation ever could. Elias reached for the final photograph in the sleeve. "There's more!" Caleb took it. At first glance it looked like nothing special. An older man, bearded and gaunt, standing on the far side of a bridge maintenance hut with snow at the railings and a date stamp burned into the corner from just 12 days earlier. Then Caleb saw the face clearly, and every nerve in him went electric. Not Garrett. Not Mercer. The man officially buried, officially mourned, officially killed under the first bridge 8 years ago. Older now. Scarred. Alive. And standing beside the ranger outpost at the far end of this very canyon. Caleb's grip crushed the edge of the photograph. "That's impossible." Elias looked more tired than old. "Not impossible. Hidden." Pike kept him breathing because dead men stop producing what they know. Mercer found out only after he'd already spent years covering the wrong grave. Caleb stared at the image until the room itself seemed to thin around it. His dead teammate was alive on the far side of the same canyon where Rook had refused the bridge tonight. Alive close enough for Mercer to set mirrored traps, and for Garrett to gamble everything on a letter. Alive close enough that all the grief Caleb had carried was no longer grief alone, but unfinished rescue. Before he could speak, Rook's head snapped toward the upper sluice tunnel, and every hair along his spine rose at once. Then came the sound, distant at first, but growing fast. Metal knocking against metal. Boots in water. More than 2. More than 3. And layered under them all, slow and unhurried, the voice Caleb now knew he had hated too simply for too long. Mercer's. "If he's found the photo." The voice echoed down through the stone. "Burn the chamber before he reaches the second bridge." Mercer's voice had barely finished echoing through the stone when the first blast hit the upper shaft. It wasn't close enough to kill them outright. It was smarter than that. It was a shape charge placed somewhere above the abutment chamber to crack the old ventilation flue and dump fire dust, and panic down into the one room Mercer already knew contained the evidence. The ceiling punched out a shower of grit and powdered mortar. The lantern blew sideways. The body cam screen went dark in Caleb's hand. Rook hit the floor first, not from fear, but from instinct, body low, ears locked, eyes cutting not toward the blast, but toward the narrow drainage seam beneath the desk. Rehook. New danger. Elias stumbled backward into the inspection table, one hand over his mouth as dust rolled through the chamber in hot gray waves. Caleb grabbed the photograph, the transcript, the calm log, and the wax-sealed body cam, shoved everything into the canvas bag, then turned just as a second concussion slammed through the tunnel mouth harder than the first. This one carried heat. Not a collapse charge. A burn charge. Mercer wasn't trying to recover the chamber now. He was trying to erase it. "There's fuel in the vent line." Elias coughed, already dragging a rusted chain box away from the back wall. "He'll turn the whole room into an oven if we stay here." Caleb's eyes snapped to the dog. Rook was still fixed on the drainage seam, one front paw lifted, growl deep and urgent, not letting the smoke or the shaking rock distract him from something more immediate. Caleb dropped beside him and ran his fingers over the stone lip. Water. Cold. Fast-moving. Too fast. Then he heard it under the blast echo and the wind and Elias's coughing, a rising subterranean roar, deep in the mountain, like a river changing course. "Not just fire," Caleb said. "He's opening the spill gates." Elias looked up sharply. "Then we've got less than a minute." The old preacher slammed the chain box clear, revealing an iron grate sunk into the floor at an angle. Rook barked once at it, then spun and barked again toward the far wall where 3 old maintenance wheels sat mounted beside corroded blueprints under cracked glass. Caleb understood instantly. One route out, one mechanism to release it. Which wheel? He barked. Elias didn't answer fast enough because he didn't know. Or worse, because he did and doubted himself. Caleb's pulse hammered. Behind them, smoke thickened. Above them, another impact split the vent line, and somewhere inside the masonry a ton of orange light began licking down through the dust. The chamber had gone from hiding place to kill box in seconds. Rook chose again. The black-and-tan shepherd limped to the center wheel, put both front paws against the base plate, and barked hard enough to shake dust from the spokes. Caleb didn't hesitate. He seized the wheel and heaved. Russ screamed. Nothing. He set his boots, ignored the burn in his shoulder, and drove harder. On the third wrench, the whole mechanism gave with a brutal metallic crack that echoed through the chamber like a rifle shot. The floor grate shuddered, then split open along one side and dropped inward, releasing a rush of black water and freezing air from the tunnel below. At the same moment, the first sheet of flame came through the vent shaft behind them. Elias swore once, grabbed the bag strap off Caleb's shoulder, and shoved it back at him. Go! Caleb looked at the opening, then at Elias. You first. Elias gave a dry, broken laugh that sounded almost offended. I sent the letter. I know the tunnel. That means I'm the last man down. Rook was already on the edge of the opening, barking into the darkness beneath it, not in warning now, but in direction, like he could hear the next shape of danger farther in. Caleb hooked one arm around the dog's chest and dropped feet first into the sluice tunnel, just as the abutment chamber behind them roared alive. Elias came after, slamming the grate half closed above them, and the 3 of them hit a narrow descending passage knee-deep in glacier-fed runoff, with firelight flickering through the bars overhead and smoke boiling down behind. The tunnel pitched hard left almost immediately. Stone walls sweated cold. Old maintenance lights hung dead from the ceiling. Rook dragged ahead despite the swelling front leg and the bandaged flank, stopping only once to bark at a side channel where the water moved too smoothly. Caleb swung the flashlight beam there and saw the problem just before stepping into it, an open drop shaft hidden beneath a flood current, black and hungry, probably 20 feet down to some abandoned valve chamber. He jerked back, heart kicking. Good boy, he breathed, voice raw. The dog didn't even look at him. He pushed on, urgent as ever, leading them deeper while the roar behind grew louder. Elias hit Caleb's shoulder from the dark. He isn't flooding the chamber to kill us, the old man said between breaths. He's hurting us. Caleb hated how instantly he knew that was true. Mercer never spent force without direction. Fire above. Water below. Smoke behind. One route forward. Which meant the route ahead ended where Mercer wanted it to. Rook barked twice, and the tunnel widened into a pumping station built inside the mountain, like a buried rib cage of steel and dripping stone. A catwalk crossed the room over a black reservoir churned by runoff. On the far side, a heavy blast door hung half open with white spray knifing through the gap. Painted over the steel in faded stenciled letters were 2 words Caleb felt in his bones before he fully read them. East Bridge. The second bridge. The one the photograph had been taken beside 12 days ago. The one that led to the ranger outpost where the man officially buried years ago had somehow been seen alive. The one Mercer had just tried to stop them from reaching by fire, flood, and force. Rook planted himself at the edge of the catwalk and froze. Not again, Caleb thought, but he knew better than to say it aloud. The shepherd's body had gone rigid, head low, eyes fixed not on the bridge door itself but on the third section of catwalk grating halfway across the reservoir. Same pattern. Same refusal. Caleb's stomach dropped. He crouched and played the beam across the metal grid. At first, all he saw was water spray and rust. Then the angle shifted, and something flashed beneath the grate. Wire. Thin, dark, tensioned under the catwalk lip, running not to an explosive this time, but to a valve lever bolted to the support column above the reservoir. "He mirrored it," Caleb whispered. Elias reached the catwalk mouth, saw what Rook had found, and shut his eyes for 1 second, like the cruelty of it had managed to surprise even him. "Third section again," he said softly. "Mercer always liked symmetry." Caleb followed the wire line farther, with the flashlight, and saw where it ended. Not under the grate. Beyond it. Through the blast door seam. Attached to the emergency lock bar on the other side. If anyone put full weight on that third section, the valve would yank open, dump the entire pressure line into the chamber, and probably blow the half-open blast door shut at the same time, cutting them off here and drowning them in the pump room while Mercer's men came in dry from the upper maintenance stairs. High danger didn't arrive as chaos alone. Sometimes it arrived as design. Rook barked once more, then shifted his stare upward toward the cable lattice near the ceiling where an old service pipe crossed above the catwalk. Caleb looked and saw, just barely, a narrow maintenance rail no wider than a boot edge running beside the pipe all the way to the blast door. Too narrow for a wounded man to carry another man. Too dangerous for any one human to cross quickly. But not impossible for a shepherd who understood edges better than fear. "No," Caleb said at once. Rook ignored him. The dog backed up 2 steps, gauged the jump with that terrifying battlefield intelligence Caleb had once trusted without question, and prepared to launch for the pipe support. Elias gripped Caleb's forearm hard. "If he gets across, he can hold the lock bar and kill the line tension." Caleb's jaw locked. "He's bleeding. So are you." Smoke began seeping into the pump room from the tunnel behind them. Somewhere above, boots hammered on iron stairs. Mercer's men were already coming down the secondary access. Caleb looked at the wire, the blast door, the rising water, the wounded dog, and felt the whole mountain narrow to one savage impossible decision. Rook solved it for him the same way he always had. He launched. The black-antenned shepherd hit the pipe rail with front paws first, slipped, caught himself, and went charging along the narrow beam above the reservoir, while Caleb's heart stopped in his chest. Halfway across, a rifle muzzle appeared through the half-open blast door on the far side. Mercer had men waiting there too. Caleb saw the shot coming the same instant Rook did, and the dog twisted in mid-run just as the rifle cracked. The round hit the pipe brace instead of flesh, blowing sparks and rust into the spray. Rook never fell. He drove harder, hit the end support, and vanished through the blast door gap into the white mist beyond. A scream followed instantly from the far side. Then another gunshot. Then silence. Caleb stared at the doorway, every nerve in him burning, and 1 second later the tension wire beneath the third catwalk section snapped loose on its own. The blast door slammed wider open under released pressure, and from somewhere beyond it Rook barked once, short, furious, alive. But before Caleb could take 1 step forward, the upper maintenance stairs behind them flooded with flashlight beams. Mercer's men opened fire into the pump room, and the first round hit the catwalk rail so close to Elias that the old man spun half around and fell backward into the black reservoir below. Elias did not vanish cleanly into the reservoir. That would have been easier to understand and far crueler to watch. He hit the black water hard, disappeared for 1 breathless second, then came back half-surfacing with one hand locked around a rusted ladder rung bolted to the inside wall of the tank, lantern light flashing once across his face before the lantern itself spun away and went under. Caleb saw all of it in one violent instant, while rounds chewed the catwalk rail, and Rook's bark came sharp and furious from beyond the half-open blast door. One part of him lunged toward the reservoir, another toward the dog, another toward the two riflemen pouring down the maintenance stairs behind them. The whole room became impossible, and then Mercer cut through it. A single suppressed shot cracked from somewhere above, and the first rifleman jerked sideways, hit the catwalk post, and dropped into the spray. The second swung his weapon upward, confused, and Mercer's second round took him through the shoulder and drove him backward into the stair railing. Caleb snapped his head up just in time to see Mercer standing on the upper maintenance landing in the drifting mist, carbine tight to his cheek, not aiming at Caleb at all. A third figure moved behind Mercer in the smoke. Mercer never looked. He drove his elbow backward, broke the man's nose with one short savage strike, and kicked him down the stairs into the reservoir below. "Move!" Mercer barked, and for the first time, there was no theater in his voice, no taunting calm, only the hard snap of a man who had run out of time. "Pike is already at the outpost." Caleb's grip tightened on the pistol. "Why should I trust you now?" Mercer's face, cut by mist and old burn scar, looked older than it had on the ledge, older and more tired and somehow more dangerous because of it. "Because if you waste 10 more seconds arguing, he kills the man you came here for and burns the second bridge behind him." Rehook. New urgency. New twist. Pike wasn't some dead command ghost in a transcript or a signature under an authorization line. He was physically ahead of them, alive in the mountains, and still moving the whole board. Rook barked again from beyond the blast door, not a warning now, but a demand, and Caleb looked just long enough to see the shepherd silhouetted in white spray on the far side of the doorway, standing on a narrow pipe-run ledge beyond the trap, body pointed into the dark tunnel that led toward the east outpost. Alive. Waiting. Still leading. Elias coughed violently from the reservoir, and slapped the iron rung with his free hand. "Ward!" Caleb dropped to the tank edge, got one arm around the old preacher's coat collar, and hauled with everything left in his back and shoulder, while the water sucked at Elias's boots, and the catwalk trembled under stray impacts. Mercer slid down the upper stairs with unnatural speed for a man his age, fired once, into the upper corridor where more boots were coming, and then caught Elias's sleeve with his free hand, helping yank him clear. The old man came over the lip coughing black water and grease, face gray, eyes furious at being alive in the middle of this. "I had the ladder," he rasped. "And I had the edge." Caleb shot back, dragging him behind the generator housing. Mercer was already at the catwalk, staring at the released wire line beneath the third section, and then at Rook on the far side. "He cut the tension by forcing the lock bar," Mercer said, almost to himself, and something flickered across his ruined face that looked too much like respect. "He did exactly what he did the first time." Caleb turned hard. "You keep talking around it." "Why?" Mercer met his eyes at last. Gunfire echoed from deeper in the upper stairwell. Steam hissed through the pump valves. Somewhere metal screamed as one of the emergency lines failed. Mercer spoke anyway, like he had already chosen the damage truth would do, and no longer feared it. "Because Pike built both bridge kills around the same assumption," he said. "That men under pressure will always trust command faster than they trust a dog. The first night, you proved him right. Tonight, the shepherd proved him wrong." The words hit clean and ugly, but there was no time to bleed under them. Rook barked once more from the far side, then turned and vanished into the tunnel beyond the blast door. Caleb made his choice. He shoved the canvas bag higher on his shoulder, checked that the photo, transcript, comm log, and body cam were still inside, and looked at Elias. "Can you walk?" Elias spat reservoir water and pushed himself upright against the pump housing. "Enough to die somewhere more useful." Mercer cut in before Caleb could answer. "Then you take the side valve corridor and seal the lower stair behind us." Pike brought enough men to hold the outpost, not enough to fight flood and fire both. Elias stared at him with naked hatred. You don't get to give orders in my mountain. Mercer accepted the hatred like an old debt. Then call it a request from a man who finally ran out of lies. Rook barked again, farther now, and the sound dragged them all back to movement. The crossing from the pump room to the east tunnel was no longer the catwalk. Too exposed, too unstable, too visible from the upper stairs. Mercer kicked loose a maintenance chain, hooked it to the overhead pipe brace, and dropped onto the narrow service ledge Rook had used, moving out over the black reservoir with the easy balance of a man who had once built death around places like this. Caleb hated how natural Mercer looked there. Hated even more that he needed him. Elias, still coughing, limped toward the valve corridor with a pry bar in one hand and the lantern, somehow recovered, in the other. 3 minutes, he said without looking back. After that I flood the stairwell whether you're clear or not. Caleb nodded once and followed Mercer onto the pipe run ledge. Cold spray hit his face instantly. The reservoir churned below like open night. One slip would not kill a man quickly. The kind of detail his mind never failed to provide. The blast door frame dripped around them as they edged through into the east tunnel. On the far side, Rook waited in a low crouch, ears high, body pointed up the grade toward faint light and mountain wind. The moment Caleb landed beside him, the dog pressed once against his knee. Not comfort, not apology, just that same fierce anchoring contact, and then surged forward again, limping but relentless. The east tunnel rose through raw stone into the mountain's outer spine, old rails underfoot, cable conduits along the walls, the smell of oil and snow thickening with every yard. Mercer moved behind Caleb now, not in front, which Caleb noticed and did not trust. "Where is he?" Caleb asked without slowing. "Upper Ranger quarters," Mercer said. "Pike always liked the highest room with the best sideline." "And the man in the photo?" Mercer's silence lasted 2 steps too long. Then, quietly, "Alive when I saw him 12 days ago." Caleb's throat went tight. "That wasn't the question." Mercer exhaled once. "Alive when Pike moved him from the lower storehouse to the infirmary room." Rehook. Hope. Fear. Near resolution. Rook stopped so suddenly Caleb almost ran into him. Ahead, the tunnel ended at a timber door hanging slightly open with snowlight spilling through the crack. No growl. No bark. The dog only listened. Caleb heard it a second later. Not boots. Not commands. A faint mechanical pulse. Regular. Artificial. A monitor. Somebody on oxygen, or on a field cardiac line, or hooked to something that measured the stubbornness of a human body refusing to quit. Caleb's heart slammed once so hard it hurt. Mercer heard it too. "He's there," he said. Caleb pushed the door open with the pistol first. The east outpost beyond looked less like a ranger station and more like a place someone had learned to keep a body alive in against all dignity. Snow blew through gaps in the shutters. A wood stove burned low in the corner. For bags hung from a coat rack. Medical tubing ran across the floor. Maps, old ledgers, bridge diagrams, and supply manifests covered the walls in layers. And in the center of the room, strapped into a reinforced chair beside a portable monitor, was a man Caleb had buried 8 years ago. Older now. Gaunter. Beard shot through with gray. Scar tissue running up the side of the neck where blast fragments must have kissed and missed the artery. But alive. Unmistakably, brutally alive. Caleb's pistol lowered an inch without his permission. Rook stepped into the room, and the man in the chair lifted his head at the sound with an effort that looked like it cost him everything left in his body. His eyes found the dog first. Not Caleb. Not Mercer in the doorway. The dog. And the sound that came out of him was half laugh, half sob, a voice worn to its bones, but still carrying the shape Caleb knew from rain-soaked breaching decks and dead-tired dawns on deployment. "You stubborn son of a—" The rest broke apart in his throat. Rook crossed the room in 3 limping strides and pressed his muzzle into the man's chest, tail low, body trembling so hard the floor line shivered against the chair. Caleb felt something in himself split wide open. 8 years of funeral silence, memorial words, closed reports, guilt without a living target, everything shattered against that one image. He took 1 step forward. Then the click came from behind the stove. Small, metallic, controlled. Caleb stopped dead. Near resolution twist hit exactly there, in the place hope opens the body wide enough for a blade. Commander Harlan Pike stepped out from the blind side of the room, wearing a dark winter field coat and the same calm, unhurried expression Caleb had once trusted more than maps. Older, yes. Hair thinner. Face lined by altitude and time. But the eyes were unchanged. Cold in the way only men who outsource guilt to necessity ever manage. In one hand, he held a compact detonator. In the other, leveled without tremor at the back of the strapped man's head, was a pistol with a suppressor fitted black and clean. "I was wondering," Pike said, voice almost conversational over the monitor's soft mechanical pulse, "whether the dog would bring you to him before Mercer got himself killed trying to be honest." Mercer stopped in the doorway behind Caleb. Rook spun away from the chair and planted himself between Pike and the strapped survivor, teeth bared, body low despite the wounds. Pike's gaze flicked to the dog and then back to Caleb with a thin smile that carried the full weight of every buried bridge. "Put your gun down, Ward," he said, thumb settling on the detonator switch. "Or this time, the shepherd gets to watch you make the same mistake twice." Pike's thumb settled more firmly on the detonator, the suppressor stayed pressed to the side of the strapped man's head, and the entire room seemed to narrow around the tiny sounds that mattered most: the monitor's patient mechanical pulse, the hiss of the wood stove, the wind grinding against the shutters, and Rook's breathing as the black-antenned shepherd stood between Pike and the chair with every muscle locked in a line of fury and warning. Caleb had lived whole years inside seconds like that. Years where a man told himself he was thinking tactically when in truth he was just deciding which guilt he could survive afterward. Pike knew it too. That was why his voice stayed so calm. "Put it down," he said again. "Last time you overrode the dog because command told you to. This time you can override him because your friend is finally in front of you." Caleb did not answer, because Rook was not looking at Pike. Not fully. The dog's ears were forward, teeth bared, body low, but the eyes kept cutting not to Pike's face, not to the pistol, not to the man in the chair, but to the baseboard by the stove, and then to the threshold leading out toward the second bridge. Pattern. Wire. Receiver. Caleb felt the realization hit with almost physical force. Pike had set this room the same way he set the bridges. Threat in the open. Kill mechanism half hidden. Choice designed to make a man commit to the obvious danger while ignoring the real one. Caleb let his gaze drift just enough, and there it was. A dark hair-thin line running from the stove leg along the floor seemed toward the bridge door, where a compact relay box sat bolted beneath the timber frame. Not just a detonator in Pike's hand. A linked system. A dead man setup or remote bridge kill, maybe both. If Caleb shot Pike clean through the chest, Pike's hand could still close. If Rook launched wrong, the dog might take the round, and the room might still blow. Same shape. Same lie. Same mistake waiting for him to wear it again. Pike saw some part of the understanding move across Caleb's face, and smiled faintly. "There it is," he said. "That hesitation. That's how bridges kill people. Not with explosives. With doubt." Mercer shifted in the doorway behind Caleb, and Pike's pistol moved instantly a half-inch deeper against the survivor's temple. "Not you," Pike said without looking. I should have let the first report bury you properly. Mercer's voice came back flat and stripped bare. You should have listened when the dog planted the first time. Pike laughed softly, and the sound was uglier than shouting. You all keep romanticizing the animal. It was a tool. Useful, yes. Intelligent, yes. But still a tool. Rook answered that with a low sound from deep in his chest, not just anger now, but grief sharpened into warning. Caleb's finger eased on the trigger instead of tightening. He had spent 8 years believing bravery meant acting faster than fear. Now he finally understood what Rook had been trying to teach him through 2 bridges, a well of old lies, and a mountain full of traps. Sometimes the bravest thing a man could do was stop forcing the wrong move. Caleb lowered the pistol 1 inch. Pike's eyes flickered. Not relief. Calculation. Good. Let him think the old pattern was still working. Caleb lowered it another inch and said quietly, Last time, I listened to command over him. Pike's smile widened just slightly. And you lived. Caleb's gaze never left Pike, but his next words were for the dog. Not tonight. Rook moved on the final word, but not at Pike's throat, not at the gun, not in the straight desperate line Caleb might once have expected. The shepherd launched sideways in a tight brutal arc across the room, hit the wall shelf, drove off it, and came in low under Pike's extended arm at an angle that avoided the floor seam and the hidden line entirely. Caleb saw Pike surprised too late to enjoy it. Rook's jaws slammed onto the detonator wrist. At the exact same instant Caleb fired, not at Pike, not at the pistol, but at the relay box beneath the bridge door. The shot blew with splinters and sparks across the threshold. Something in the floor wiring popped dead. Pike roared and fired reflexively, but the suppressed round went into the stove iron instead of the chair. Mercer was already moving. He crossed the room in 2 strides and drove his shoulder into Pike's gun arm hard enough to send all 3 bodies crashing into the wall maps. The detonator flew. The pistol stayed in Pike's hand for 1 second more before Rook twisted harder and tore the wrist down toward the floor. Caleb reached the chair, cut the first restraint strap, then the second. Up close his friend looked older than death should have allowed, cheeks hollow, wrists bruised raw, one eye ringed dark from old sedatives and newer beatings, but alive. Horribly, stubbornly alive. The man tried to speak and failed, then managed it on the second breath. Took you long enough, he whispered. Caleb almost broke at that. Almost. But Pike was not done. Of course he wasn't. Mercer had him against the wall, Rook had his wrist, but Pike still moved like command had trained him to move, cold, efficient, without wasted emotion. He slammed his forehead into Mercer's scarred cheek, drove a knee into the dog's wounded flank, and ripped free just enough to hurl himself backward through the bridge door into the storm and snowlight beyond. Caleb saw the detonator skidding toward the threshold and lunged, catching it inches before it slid outside. Broken casing. Dead switch. Good. Not enough. Pike was already on the second bridge approach, blood on one hand, pistol in the other, backing fast toward the swaying span that cut across the gorge to the trailing escape route beyond. Wind hit the open doorway in a freezing blast. Snow lifted off the cables. And there, at the exact edge of the bridge, Rook stopped. The dog planted hard, barked once, then refused the first plank with the same total certainty as before. Caleb hit the threshold beside him, saw the bridge rocking in the storm, saw Pike halfway onto it, and the old instinct rose. Chase, close, finish, force the crossing before distance became failure. But this time the dog was there first. Rook's body blocked the entry. His bark cut once more, not at Pike now, but at the third panel and the left suspension junction box below the rail. Caleb stopped instantly. No argument. No override. No command. Just trust. Mercer came up at his shoulder, breathing hard. "Secondary line is still live," he said. Pike heard it, turned halfway back from the bridge center, and for the first time some of his calm slipped. "Shoot him, then," he called over the wind, pistol raised one-handed now. "Be the man you were trained to be." Caleb dropped to one knee instead, and followed the line Rook had given him. There, beneath the left rail brace, a small black firing node wired into the underslung cable, hidden in frost and old rust. Rook barked at it again. Caleb fired once. The node exploded in blue-white sparks. Pike's expression changed completely. Remote gone. Pattern broken. He took one quick step backward, then another, trying to remember the safe path across a bridge he no longer fully controlled. His heel hit the third panel exactly where Rook had refused to place a paw. The board gave with a savage crack. Pike dropped through to his waist, caught the side cable with one arm, and hung over the gorge as the whole bridge whipped sideways under him. His pistol fell into the river below. For one suspended second nobody moved. Snow tore through the span. Metal shrieked. Pike looked up at Caleb, hanging where another man had once hung, and there was no command voice left in him now, only raw survival. "Help me," he said. Caleb took one step forward without thinking. Rook blocked him instantly, chest against shin, growling so deep it shook. Not again. Caleb looked down at the dog, then back at Pike, and saw it at last. The backup line still looped under the broken panel, tensioned around Pike's weight. One more step onto that plank, one more human impulse to force the rescue, and the bridge would take another victim. Pike saw Caleb see it. Desperation curdled instantly back into the man he really was. He let go with his free hand, not to reach for help, but to snatch a tiny backup pistol from the inside of his coat. Mercer fired before Caleb did. One shot. Clean. Pike's shoulder snapped backward. His grip broke. He fell without another word, swallowed by snow, dark water, and the canyon that had waited 8 years to take back what he'd built over it. Silence did not come immediately. The bridge kept screaming in the wind. Caleb's blood kept hammering. Rook kept growling at the empty space where Pike had vanished until Mercer stepped back from the door and let his own pistol hang loose at his side. "It's over," Mercer said, but nobody in that room believed endings came that fast. The real proof came 30 seconds later, when footsteps pounded up from the lower service stairs, and Rook whirled, barking once in warning. Caleb brought the gun up again, only to see Elias emerge first through the blowing snow with one arm under Garrett's shoulders. Burned, bleeding, limping hard, but alive. Garrett looked from Caleb to the open bridge door, to the empty air beyond, and understood enough without being told. "He fall?" he asked. Mercer nodded once. Garrett shut his eyes briefly, not in triumph, just in exhaustion deep enough to feel like mourning for the whole rotten chain of men and orders that had led them here. Behind them, the man from the chair tried to stand and failed. Caleb got to him before he hit the floor. Up close, the old friend smelled of antiseptic, mountain cold, and the faint familiar trace of the same soap he used to steal from supply crates overseas when everything else smelled like salt and weapons oil. The man's hand found Caleb's sleeve, then Rook's neck. His fingers buried in the shepherd's fur and stayed there trembling. "He kept coming back for the same voice," Garrett said hoarsely from the doorway, and the sentence landed with all the weight of the photos, the tapes, the bridges, the lies. Rook pressed into the survivor's chest and made one low broken sound from somewhere deeper than pain. The man bowed his head into the dog's fur and whispered the words that should have been heard years earlier, the words Mercer, Garrett, Elias, and every dead transcript had been circling all night. He was right. Caleb shut his eyes for 1 second because that was all he could afford if he wanted to stay standing. When he opened them again, Mercer was already setting his weapon on the floorboards, then reaching into his jacket and laying a waterproof wallet of documents beside it. Account ledgers, route keys, names, copies. The rest of the rot. "Take it all," he said. "I'm done choosing which truth survives." Elias moved to the radio shelf beneath the map wall, powered the old emergency repeater with a violent crank, and sent the mountain's first honest distress call in years out into the storm. Dawn found them on the near side of the bridge, after the repeater brought county rescue, after medics loaded the survivor and Garrett into separate rigs, after statements started and cuffs closed around Mercer's wrists, not because Caleb forgave him, but because justice finally had something solid to hold. Caleb sat on a snow-damp rock above the canyon trail with Rook's bandaged flank pressed against his leg and the black-antenned shepherd's heavy head resting across his boot. Below them, the second bridge swung in pale morning light with its trap lines tagged and its false supports marked in neon paint by investigators. The first bridge from years ago was still miles away and deep under other mountains, but somehow this one felt like its answer. The survivor was alive. Garrett was alive. Pike was gone. The evidence was real. And the dog who had been right all along was still here, breathing against Caleb's boot like a steadying heartbeat. Caleb looked down at Rook and let the truth come all the way in without fighting it this time. "You stopped me twice," he said quietly. "First from dying, then from becoming the same man again." Rook lifted one paw and rested it over Caleb's wrist, the same grounding pressure as before, only now it no longer felt like warning. It felt like absolution without innocence, trust without forgetting. Caleb bent forward and pressed his forehead to the dog's. Around them, the mountain finally sounded different, less like a trap, less like a grave, more like a place where buried things had at last been forced into daylight. He had crossed plenty of bridges in his life. Most of them had taken something. This one gave something back. Not the lost years. Not the dead. But the part of him that still knew how to listen when the only honest voice in the whole story belonged to the dog beside him. And as the sun broke over the snow line and rescue crews moved like bright insects below, Rook stayed against his leg, warm, steady, alive, and Caleb understood the real ending at last. The shepherd had never refused the bridge out of fear. He had refused it out of memory, loyalty, and love strong enough to stand against command, grief, guilt, and every lie a man could build to survive. This time, Caleb had followed him,